Hello, everybody. Good morning. Uh, Welcome in Prague. Welcome on BUDOKON Prague this week. I would like to introduce our guests. And we got here Melayne Shayne and Cameron Melayne from BUDOKON from Montana. Am I right? And they came for this really nice workshop in next 2 days. And I would like to give you a word. If you could introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about the Budokon mobility for Jiu-Jitsu and Budokon yoga. What is it and what can people looking forward?
Ladies first.
Okay, I'm just the co-creator, but yes, I'll go first. Budokon is a mixed movement art system. So we pretty much divide it into what we call living arts, which is personal development, life coaching, and then the movement aspect, which is a black belt system. So we are connected to two of our teachers, Shanji Ribeiro and Rafael Lovato Jr. So we have a jiu-jitsu lineage, and within the Budokon construct, we also teach striking, mixed martial arts, Budokon mobility, Budokon yoga, crawling patterns, and all this created by this man over here many, many years ago. Maybe you want to talk about that time in your life.
So a lot of mushrooms and LSD. Yes, I am I'm the inventor of this idea. When I was training as a kid in martial arts, I was first introduced to traditional styles, taekwondo and karate do, and even kung fu. Just you're very in my generation, the 70s and the 80s, traditional martial arts were the commonly practiced systems. As I got older, I started to get introduced to yoga and also other types of movement ideas. I mean, I grew up in the era of breakdancing and the sort of development of contemporary or modern dance. I mean, all that stuff was sort of happening 70s and 80s and sort of formulating into what it has become now. But when you were young at that time, you were sort of involved in a little bit of everything. My family, my grandmother specifically, was a dance professional dancer and a champion dancer, and so my family all danced. Everybody, I was exposed to it. My dad was quite aggressive in a lot of fighting, so I grew up with on my dad's side. My uncles, they were all like kind of like street fighters. They fought all the time. Growing up, and on my mom's side, everybody were dancers. So I kind of got this weird combination of exposure of ideas. And then as I got older, I started to explore yoga. I moved to Los Angeles. I started to explore yoga, and then LA just, I think being there, and being that the city is so multi-movement cultural, there's so much going on there, at least at that time. I was exposed to so many different ideas. I started to think to myself, and this is, of course, where I found jiu-jitsu as well. I started to think to myself, something is missing in the modern mixed martial arts, which is becoming very sport-oriented. And in the traditional martial arts, something's missing here because they're still stuck in these sort of old ways of doing things without having any sort of openness to where you could go with your training. So it was kind of like these two worlds weren't in some way serving each other or the students themselves. So I decided that I was going to start, teaching a more complete style, which I then started calling mixed movement arts versus mixed martial arts, because it was mixed martial arts is just too limited. It's because there's other kinds of movement languages within what we're doing in Budokan, I couldn't limit it to that by just calling it mixed martial arts. It's actually just not accurate. So I started saying, well, the obvious formula for making a great combat athlete, but also just a great athlete as a human being, would be strength, flexibility, agility, adaptability, cardiovascular conditioning. I mean, when you look at all the elements that make a great athlete, you have to address different things. You can be as strong as you want and have no cardio. You can have all the cardio in the world and not have enough flexibility and be so you can there's all kinds of areas that you have to address, which I mean, let's be honest, being an athlete is like a full-time job. There's so much you have to do. And that doesn't even include nutrition, self-development, like looking at who you are and how you're being, sleeping, I mean, there's so much involved in being a warrior that it truly does become a full-time occupation and it's very difficult to do it as a hobbyist because you don't have enough hours in the day. You're trying to pay the bills. So it's really difficult to as much as I know many hobbyists would love to make warriorship their profession and their path and their life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's difficult because you're busy trying to, live in the matrix, so it's a complicated issue.
And this was actually what has really drawn me personally to it back in the days, almost 10 years ago. The name itself, Budokan, means the way of the warrior spirit. So the way is what Cameron was just saying, is really making it not just a habit, but really a way of living, right? It becomes part of your identity, who you are. And this is what I feel like makes Budokan so unique out there, because it's not just a fitness thing. It's not just, let's say, something you do, but it's something you are constantly becoming because it is so relevant, I feel like, to all aspects of our life other than just the movement practice, because it encompasses so much more. And this is what we obviously, every time we teach, want to bring awareness to, that people are not just moving through patterns of movement, but at the same time, they're also always reflective of how they think, how they be, how they show up. So that is what I think makes Budokan so unique.
If I could add this idea, is that I was lucky being born in the 70s and being exposed to traditional martial arts, because traditional martial arts, as much as you can, as a modern martial artist, might make fun of, old school ideas such as Aikido or karate or Taekwondo. One of the things that the traditional Japanese system did very well was teach the development of character. That's one of its primary intentions. So because it comes from the Bushido, it comes from the samurai code and way of education. So as traditional as that is, that was the focal point. It was like, how do you develop a complete, and at this time, not to be, chauvinist, because that's not the intention, but it was all male, because the samurai were male. There were female samurais, but Tomoe, very famous samurai. But it was obviously quite common for males to be in this archetype. And given that, they were trying to develop, the kind of man that would be a contribution to society, not someone that was, taking away from society, not someone who was a criminal, someone, because again, the earliest days of the of the samurai, pre-samurai, was just these guys were just mercenaries. They were literally just fighters and warriors. They were military guys. They were savages. They didn't have any particular code. There was nothing higher above them than survival. And so that was the earliest form of the Japanese warrior. It was not the samurai. It didn't start like that. It developed into that. And then by the time a samurai was sort of the concept of the samurai was fully developed, what you had was a very specific kind of Renaissance character, an artist, a thinker, a philosopher, a fighter. This was a very well-developed construct, not just somebody that could go into a ring and fight. So that's where traditional karate do and judo, all of this, and aikido, it all came from that. So as it developed and it became westernized, as soon as it found its way to the West, whether it was France or the US or Britain, it started losing some of the qualities that made it Japanese. It started losing some of the intention and focus on living a life that was in service to society, in service to community, because that's not Western value. That's not how Westerners think. And so slowly you start picking away at that and going, oh, we don't need that. We don't need that part. And then all you get left with is a prize fighter. That's all it gets reduced down to. Just basically a UFC version of a guy who just goes in and makes money, fighting. This is the loss. This is the true loss of traditional martial arts, transitioning to modern martial arts. And that's why Budokan, to me, is so important, because I bridge that gap in my age, where I happen to be from that generation of old school, still Bruce Lee, who still thought the same way, still traditionally, philosophically. And then I do also, and I train UFC fighters. So I meet in the middle in terms of my life experience, and I try to bridge that gap by teaching, someone to be a fully cultured person.
I just wanted to ask you, when you mentioned the Western style of fighting or fighters, when you compare with the Europe or with the other gyms which you visit, how is the energy there? Do you feel that people came there for being the best and have a prize money fight, or they are there more like a hobbies, or it's some kind of their culture? How do you feel it? Because you travel a lot, you have lots of experience around the world, so I think that you could say something about it.
I think it in the West, it always feels the same to me. I don't feel there's anything that stands out to me as different between Europe and the US in regard to the approach of martial arts. The only time that I find that approach is different is when I go to Japan. And you still have this culture where people say, this is my do, being this is my way. And I live this as my way. It's not just something I do, again, as a hobbyist. It's not the way I stay in shape. It's not the way I even stay in community and healthy. No, it's my complete path. I study it as a path. If I speak to a modern martial artist and I ask them a question as simple as, have you ever read the Bushido? Like the code of the samurai. Have you ever read any of the work, The Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi? Have you ever done any real work with, from the origins of this? Most would say no. Most have no experience with it. Like, how much philosophy do you read? How much self-development work do you do? I could make the argument that without that, you're not even studying true Budo. I could just say you're just studying how to fight. And that's fine. I mean, again, it's not a criticism. It's an observation of what occurs. You could say that, today I went to the coffee shop and I noticed that everything inside the coffee shop was sustainable from the straws to the forks to the cutlery, everything was made from sustainable materials, not recyclable, because that's not sustainable. Nothing, that's all a lie. You can't, recycling doesn't work because it just continues to we make plastic, which you cannot recycle. So you make products out of biodegradable materials, which is obvious, it's so clear. And this place was, fully equipped with that and, representing that idea. And you say, okay, here's a complete representation. You can't just serve, food that promotes an idea and then everything else around it is promoting a different idea. It's complete contradiction. So many fighters today are just in complete contradiction. Humans today are in complete contradiction, but certainly if we're just going to talk about fighters, they're in contradiction. They, a lot of them, they claim this, but they do that. And then some are just shamelessly and honestly clear that it doesn't matter to them. Conor McGregor is a perfect example. He's like, look at my Lamborghini boat, look at my Rolex. I fight for money. Money's what I'm here to do and make and create. And that's fine because in all honesty, at least he's honest. He's not pretending to be someone he's not. I'll give him that. That's not what I think is the greatest pursuit for a human being. And I think Mike Tyson is a great example of someone who's been there, done that, and comes away being more philosophical and samurai-like than anybody that I've ever seen transition in modern martial arts history from one perspective, one sort of position to another position.
Absolutely agree, but Mike Tyson is also a really nice example of how the other medicines, as you said, the mushrooms or the Mary Jane, can help you with your brain, with your mindset, and with your goals in your life. But I would like to give you a word. What you would like to say, Veronica?
Yeah, well, to our guest, my name is Veronica Alistair, and this is my husband. He forgot to introduce me, so I'm introducing myself. And I just...
I apologize.
It's okay. Actually, I am interested in, you're talking about the way of the warrior, both of you, that it's basically your path. And I'm interested, like, how you integrate this path into your relationship, into your marriage.
By fighting. Constantly.
Practice,
we practice
on
fighting
each other
daily.
Every day.
That's a good question. How do we actually pretty much do what we preach, right? We preach a certain way, and how do we integrate it into our daily lives, which is our relationship? I would say that with the way, let's say, of the warrior come a lot of different aspects of how to be, certain values and virtues, you could even say. One that I think Cameron already just mentioned now, contradiction. I think this is something where we really hyper-focused on in ourselves and with each other, to remind ourselves when we are in contradiction with what we say we do, but then how we in the end act, or how we might even become judgmental of each other or other people, but then at the same time we're actually also maybe falling back into patterns. So I think one is this raw honesty with each other, to constantly be in check, right? One, yes, for ourselves, but then also for each other. And then the ability to not take it too personally. This is really, I would even say, one of my deepest works, that not feeling that you're attacked and then you have to defend yourself, which you could say this is the battle, this is the war. But then how can this really more become a dance with each other? Because I don't think that we will ever completely be resolved with all our childhood stuff and whatever came up for us and who we have become to be. However, I think the relationship we choose with each other is a place to practice, to practice being my word, to practice expanding my mind, to practice really what I think and I wish I were, right? And being this for each other. But I also admit I like to fight. This is part of my personality. So having a partner to do that with is great because I think relationships need friction. This is when we move into a new direction. It's great to have someone that is pushing me, right? Which I think is also an aspect of war, like moving forward, not remaining stagnant. And the heart, right? To me, fighting is also a lot about the heart and the passion. And that is something that we definitely live with each other.
I think that in your relationship, I mean, just to speak to marriage or just to speak to any kind of relationship with another human being, this is where we learn about, who we be, who we are. I think it's tricky because obviously, who we are being doesn't mean this, has to remain. We can change. But that requires a change in belief. But it also requires an understanding of nuance. Life is complicated, but not general life itself, because general life itself is just, I'm born and my work is to stay alive until until I die. That's, so the general premise of life is just stay alive. But as a human being, the nuance of being human is the psychology of human consciousness, which is complex because humans are not simple. We can see the world in, future, past, present, in, third person. There's me, how I see you seeing me, how I see you seeing me seeing me seeing you. I mean, you can play these games and it becomes almost like a house of mirrors of reflection, and so it becomes super complicated. And that's where able to understand nuance is so important. We have an argument, as an example, around honesty. This is an ongoing battle that we have. I personally, you can have a code around honesty where you say, my code is, I never tell a lie. I never tell a lie, ever, under any circumstances. Like, that's my code. Or you can have a code that says, I tell the truth when it's necessary, and I don't when it's not, I don't want to even say deceptive. I'm just not, forthright. I'm not completely honest when I don't think it's necessary. You can have these different positions that you hold. I would argue that because humans are so complicated, it's impossible to be absolutely honest all the time, because human etiquette, which is a completely invented idea, right? There's no such thing. Like, there's no etiquette, as an example, in the animal kingdom. No etiquette about how you show up for certain things, but there is behavioral patterns that work and don't work. Let's say that the lions, they make a kill. And, there may be a social etiquette as to who gets the food first, how that works, who gets handed food. This could be in the apes as well. So there's a sort of an etiquette that gets developed. It's not necessarily, well, again, we're going to understand it as an etiquette because it's almost like an unspoken rule of behavior that starts to develop in the social structure of this animal. So it could be hierarchical. It could be based on different things. But I'm saying I'm sure it's mostly based on who's in charge, who's the biggest. But what it brings to question is, can we ever truly be completely honest with each other, given the complexity of human consciousness, given that it's in some places not appropriate to be completely honest with another person? It's not appropriate. They're just there are, like, as an example, let's say I'm at a funeral and someone is giving a speech about another person, and they're boring and they're full of themselves. And the speech isn't even about the dead person. It's about them being seen by everyone in the room and being somehow, this is their opportunity to be heard. And I just want to stand up and go, hey, you're full of shit and you're boring me. And this is not an appropriate time to make this moment about you. That's my truth. I can't do that. And it doesn't work. It's not socially appropriate to do it. So I don't believe in this idea of complete honesty. I don't believe in it. And therefore, and I tell her, and then we fight about this because she's like, but will you be 100% always honest with me? And I'm like, no, I'm not.
Because I think there's nuance also in honesty, transparency, deception, right? I think honesty by itself is not one way. So I agree that there are nuances. And I think this is just another place for us to unravel even language, and what we personally each understand something and where we can come to agreements or where we agree to disagree.
Well, you have to get incredibly specific. Where do you want me to be absolutely honest with you? And where does it not matter to you? But then again, all this becomes a game of people wanting to feel in control. And this is what I argue with her. I'm like, this is just you wanting to feel in control by knowing everything. So we always want to know. The more we think we know, the more we think we have control. The more we think we're safe. And this all becomes about safety and safety management. I personally don't get my safety from knowing what she thinks or does. I get my safety from me. My safety is in me knowing that no matter what happens, me is okay. And that's how it's got to be. And and me relying on you for my safety, or you for my safety, or I don't rely on anyone for my safety. Not my mother, not my wife, not my daughter, not my dog, no one. Me is the person that gives me safety. And if I don't, and that's what I get to practice every day by owning that. That's where I practice. You know what I'm saying? Instead of practicing making my safety about you, I'm going to practice making my safety about me.
When you realize this information,
yesterday.
Is it? No, but to be honest, you have to have a practice about it. I think that when you said to someone and people will just think about it, they will be not able to integrate it. So it should be some way, some Budokon to this.
Well, these are
state of mind.
these are the earliest ideas of the samurai, of development of self, of Zen meditation, is that there's only you. And it's time for you to really get clear on there's only you, and only you give you safety. Only you give you love. Only you give you happiness. You can enjoy your perception of love from another person. In other words, I feel loved by her because I perceive her behavior as loving. I could also choose not to perceive it that way. I could also not get her love and feel very unloved, even though she's being the exact same person. She could love you, and you may not receive her love the same way I do. We're all like some type of fit together where it's like, oh yeah, I get your love, and it feels like I'm being loved in that way. So I think there's something very unique and special about learning, how to love yourself and keep yourself safe, so that you don't needy. I don't want to be needy. Give me, let me take. I mean, it's complicated, again, to be a human being. There's no dispute here. But we have to go back to practicing we have to be self-assured. We have to be self-centered, self-aware. We have to be able to make self-adjustment. Everything is about what you're doing to you, not what you're doing to your partner, not what you're doing to the world around you. You can adjust it all you want. That's never going to fix it. It's all about what are you adjusting within you. And that is how it's done. There's nothing else to do. That everything else is an illusion. Everything else is a lie. Everything else is wasted effort on your part, trying to change the world around you versus changing your perception or your interpretation, your relationship with it. At the point of origin, which is here. This is the point of origin. And that, it's like the muscle. There's an origin and an insertion. There's a point where it begins and a point where it attaches. I begin here and I attach to you. I don't try to fix the attachment point. I work on fixing the origin. And then, because I have control of that. Maybe I have a little control of this, in all fairness, maybe just for the sake of an argument. Maybe I have a little bit of control of saying, hey, I would appreciate if you wouldn't talk to me that way. And she can be like, okay, I hear that. And so I can make little adjustments if she cooperates and we agree. But the big adjustment, of course, has to be inside me because I'm the point of origin and everything comes this way to that way. And that, so it's like, you want to fix why the river is why is the river toxic? Well, you don't go to the bottom where it's coming out into the ocean. You go to the top and you figure out where it's getting something put inside of it that's flowing that way. It's silly to try to fix it from the bottom, metaphorically.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Thank you for this. It's really beautifully said, like both of you, what you just explained, like when it comes to relationships and like how, the way of communicating and like the topic of the safety. I think that's a big topic in today's society. And so my question is, what's the vision of Budokon actually when it comes to the mindset and like where you actually go, not only with your workshops, but also like what is the vision? Because now you talk about the safety, and in my opinion, like if people have this kind of mindset, the world would look completely differently. So I'm quite curious, like what you are actually onto.
More mushrooms?
Always mushrooms for the visions, I would say. Yes. Or other medicine helps too with that. I personally can even say I had visions with medicine work, ayahuasca specifically for me, that actually led me in the direction to working more with women only. Even based on what you were just saying around safety, the martial art component to me is what I perceive as for myself, from my own experience, as very empowering. And that is something that I want to continue to inspire in other women, that they're actually willing to tap more into that warrior quality. Because I think, obviously there's always different paradigms and shifts, and women have been one way, then have maybe shifted completely different way. There's feminism, there's this and that. But for me, I think now is the time for us women to step into that warrior energy in relationship to our, we can call it more feminine energy or whatever it is. But for me, it's always about the integration of both, because I don't think they can exist without each other. So I feel a lot of women are avoidant and they reject this idea of stepping into this out of different reasons, fear, conditioning, whatever their motives are. But for me, I think giving them this little push and giving them a platform where they can access that part of themselves is what my vision is. And the beauty, obviously, with Budokon is that we have such a variety of movement languages, of philosophy, of cultural aspects that draw different people into our community, into the tribe. So this is where I see all this happening. So the vision for me with Budokon is inviting more of this tribal culture and a remembering, a reassembling of who we are as this creature, right? And this can be seen in many different ways and experienced in so many different ways. But what we've created, for example, now in Montana, to me is really bringing this vision to life of having a home base, a place for people to come to not necessarily forget their lives at home, but reassess, what do I really want in my life? Who am I? Or who do I want to be? What are my aspirations? What are my motivations? How can I feel the full potentiality of my body, of my mind, of my heart? So this is where I see us really going, with always the question or this underlying school model almost that we have of the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So being in this isolated bubble in a way where you are exposed to different ideas, and with those ideas exposed to different parts of yourself, this is where, to me, the work begins, right? And there is then, okay, maybe I have to lean a little bit more here versus there. So it's a recalibration constantly for us. Where are we going with this? And I think as we evolve, Budokon evolves with us. So in that sense, we don't really have this 5-year, 10-year plan, business plan. It's really more, it's our own evolution and development and things we expose ourselves to, things that we are trying out, and that then finds its way into what we share.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's to strengthen Melayne's point, is to say we're not a business. Businesses think this way. I have no issue with someone thinking this way. It's not a criticism to say that, Apple as a company shouldn't be thinking about, where it's at in 10 years, but they make products. We don't make products. We create experiences. And those experiences, like all things that, they change, they can take on new faces and shapes and directions. Somehow you're like, I'll give you a great example. When I first started Budokon, I started teaching the whole system, just as it was, the full system. I was teaching martial arts, yoga, mobility. I was teaching everything at one time. And what's interesting is it wasn't working. It was working. It was working, but it wasn't working. It wasn't working because it was too much at that time. You're talking almost 30 years ago. You're talking in an era where people were like, where martial arts and yoga had nothing to do with each other. Literally nothing to do with each other. And people thought I was crazy, and the martial artists didn't take me seriously because they were like, oh, is the yoga guy. And the yogis didn't take me seriously because this is the martial arts guy. He doesn't understand yoga. So I wasn't violent enough for the martial artists, and I wasn't peaceful enough for the yogis. And I was trying to, bridge a gap in understanding. And what I had to do eventually, and this is how sometimes you have to listen to people. There are two approaches business-wise. You tell people what to think, or you listen to what people think and you move based on that. And in the beginning, I was influencing how people thought. I was like, this is what you need to think. This is how you need to see it. And then at some point I said, well, okay, because people were coming, a lot of the yogis were coming, I really love Budokan, but I really like the yoga part. I'm not into the martial arts part so much. And I was like, okay. And this is when I shifted a little bit and I said, let me listen to what the people think. And so I created a primary series, a specific yoga series for these people. And that was a huge growth spurt for the work, because I was talking to that audience and I was giving that audience something very specific that they wanted. The martial artists were not really getting much because I had already been giving them the whole thing. So it was really the yoga community that helped grow the brand, the style, the system, whatever you want to call it. It helped grow it because they were hungry and interested in a yoga system or style that was different and brought the qualities that we brought to it. So it succeeded there. Then, after a bit of time, I recognized that I was no longer really serving the martial arts community anymore. I was just really heavily giving to the community that seemed to be receiving me the best, which was the yoga community. So then I made a pretty strong switch and started pushing the martial arts again. And that's kind of where we are now, where I'm out here sharing the mobility for jiu-jitsu part of our work to really get that community serviced, to give them some contact with us. So all this being said, to make the point that you're constantly listening. You can't say, here's where the business is going to be in 10 years. You have to say, you have to understand that, humans, there's a certain amount of predictability, and then there's everything else. So you can only be out in front so far. There were lots of people there were a lot of people who knew there was a pandemic coming, like scientists who said, there will be some virus that comes and we will have this problem, but they couldn't tell you when, unless they worked at Wuhan. Yeah, and in this case, maybe there was more clarity. But for the rest of us, no one could tell you when this would occur. So you can only plan so far ahead, is my point. And I think that this is wise, to be very present to what you're doing and listening and interacting with whether it's your quote unquote customer because you provide a product, or it's your students because you provide a service of education. But you're in a constant listening. A lot of people are just talking all the time and they're not listening. And the more successful you get, the less you listen and the more you talk, because you start to win so much that you forget what losing is like. You forget to be sensitive, because in the beginning you're listening. When you're hungry and you're lean, you're young, you're like, what? Okay, you're more sensitive to what's going on. You start to get a little fat, and you start to get a little comfortable, and you start to get a little lazy. You stop listening and you start telling. You're the king now, and you're just sitting and you're talking about what's, so it can happen to anyone. It could be like the iPhone, with Max, like, we've been running this, thing for a long time. We think we pretty much know how, what people want. And the next thing you know, somebody else comes up with something that they didn't think about, because they weren't innovating anymore. They were just building off of what they've already done. So I think you always have to be humble and hungry and never think you've made it. I never think I've made it. I never walk around like I am the king, that I've made something, that something is complete or permanent. I'm always studying and looking. I'm always a little bit jealous, a little bit, I keep those things alive in me where I look at somebody else and I'm like, fuck that guy, I can do that better. What is this? Oh, this fucking person's copy. I like to keep a little bit of edge in me. That it's very small. It's not enough to it's not unmanaged. It's more that it's the game that Picasso played with Matisse. It was like Matisse came out with a painting and Picasso was like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm gonna best that. That's amazing. And that's why I fucking have to beat it, because it's so good. And I have to be, you need a Matisse.
I think, you need adversity in your life. And we talk about that a lot too, that this can be a driving force, right? Because yes, we can get comfortable where we are if there's nothing else happening around us and you just sit in that and that's it. So I think something that we both really have in us is that ability also to pivot, right, quickly, versus holding on to what is or what we wanted it to be. But the pandemic is a great example. We had a studio in Miami that was running beautifully. We had a great time in our own ways. It was really a great lab for us to keep developing curriculum. But then with COVID, we had to close our doors and we didn't really know when we would open again. And we both were like, okay, we're moving and let's find something. And it's in nature and we're going to just create something different. And I think these are great qualities in terms of what we even want people to take away with them whenever they are with us in experiences, that adaptability, change, adjust, and be quick. Like be quick in your mind, be quick on your feet, right? This is what we teach in movement. And then it's the same in life as we just move forward and things constantly happen, right? You have to figure out your own way in that matrix.
And if you're copying people, this is another thing too. I can't name how many people have copied or try to copy or borrowed from my work. It's just like, there was no one that was teaching yoga and martial arts together as a system and an idea. When I started this idea, it was not a thing that was happening. Some people were teaching martial arts and some people were practicing yoga and they were sort of, playing with ideas, but not understanding that the real work was in bridging the two completely so that you could explain where the yogic work showed up in the martial work and where the martial work showed up, like really being able to speak two languages at one time. And that it wasn't happening. And now people, even though people try to do it, I'm just 30 years ahead of them. It's hard to catch up at this point. And people try to do things, they try to produce ideas out there. But the biggest problem with people is the lack of sincerity. I sincerely love my work, but for me, not for you. And that, I mean, no offense when I say that to anyone. My work is not for you. My work is for me. You can use my work for you. You can use this work for you and you grow with it. But I made it for me, for my practice. And that's where I'm honest and sincere and in integrity. I didn't make it to sell it. I made it to make me better. And I can't say that most of these guys and people out there do it for that reason. They make it so they can sell it. They're trying to create a product. They're trying to create something that they can monetize. I'm not. And I've never been that way. And she'll tell you because she's very German. And she's, and being very
That's
German.
a good thing.
Yes. Being very German means that she's very practical in that way. This is a complete stereotype, but I'm going to, go there anyway. She's very practical and she understands, structure and flow and organization and money. And she's like, da, da, da. And me, I'm like, fuck money, fuck people. And I'm the first person, I kick people out of training all the time. Basically what I'm doing is just saying goodbye to money. I mean, literally somebody's like paying $3,000. I'm like, you're gone. And there goes $3,000. There goes $6,000. I do it frequently. Someone would be like, you're crazy. Just don't say anything. Let that person be. Keep the money. And run your business. But for me, I don't run a business. I teach a lifestyle. And if you can't adapt and understand it and and contribute to it, I don't want your money. Your money's poison to me. So I don't have that I'm not a whore for anything. So that's how I operate. And she supports it 100%. She doesn't say a word to me. She's just like, okay, they're gone. And she just goes over. No, she just goes over and
take them to the airport.
Yeah, she takes them to the airport. She gives them their money back. There's no dispute. We don't argue about it. It's not even a thing. She's
Because I
like,
think
okay.
we both also see the bigger picture of it, right? They're poison for the whole collective, and this one person is like a cancer, and they just have to be removed in that setting. And we both have become, same here, very quick in distinguishing who is really part of the bigger picture or who isn't, and we work together on that end, the German and the American.
You are a couple, you know. So your power is like a king and queen. When you said like no, thank you, goodbye, people have nothing to say again. It's done. So I would like to continue because you said that you are inspired by many other people and you feel sometimes a little bit jealous about them and making fun of them, but in the nice way, of course. And
The nicest.
But I think that if you want to be better, you really need to have the sparring partner. And I think that it's absolutely right to see someone who's doing something really good and have the feeling like, oh my God, he's so fucking good. I want to be good as him. No, I want to be better than him. And have the small fire, small drive, not in competitive, but maybe in cooperative way. Because, you know, when you take these two good motherfuckers and put them together, don't know what you can make. The fire can get bigger and you set the focus probably on the right way. Yeah. So that was the first things what I want to share. And the second, when you said about the Budokon, this is the way. I think,
the reason why I love the Budokon is that it's not a product. It's not the final destination. I don't know what's going to happen next month, next year. I don't know how I change my life, my abilities, my skill.
not just as a student, but also as a teacher, because for me it's something different to learn how to move and then how to teach it, because your style is a little bit different that I had before. But I realized that lots of the guys from the brothers and even the girls from the sisters, they are sometimes afraid of mixed martial arts because they see the money fights, they see the big guys, and the feeling around this area is absolutely different. It's competitive. You got me. But when we do the mobility or the basics, they feel much more better, and they start to realize that, okay, let's go to learn something new from the fight world, even if they know that they will never use it in the cage or somewhere like that. So my next question is how you can share the Budokon with absolutely beginners, because like becoming Budokon is the first step on the way for your better being with Budokon. Am I right?
I think that, to your first question, it's good to be competitive a little bit with yourself. And competitive. I think it's good to like to compete, meaning that there's an interest in winning, but the winning, again, a healthy way to frame that is, I'm competing with myself to become better. And of course, it's just an opinion whether I'm better than that person or not when it comes to something that is, something like movement. I mean, it's one thing if we're arguably even in a fight, it's difficult to say, is this person truly better than this other person? Because is it the day? Is it the moon, the tides? The god of luck? Many things. Because if you put the same two people in a fight 5 times, it's very likely, if they're both at a very high level, it's very likely that each one of them will win. It's very unlikely it'll be 5-0. It's more likely it'll be 3-2, or could even be 4-1. But it's unlikely that one person wins every time when they're both at a very high level. So I think that's why it's important that you never get caught up in the idea that you're the best, because you're the best on that day, at that moment, under those circumstances. Maybe you had a really good weight cut this time and they didn't, in MMA as an example. But the next time you have a bad weight cut and you don't feel the same energetic level, you don't, recover as quickly, whatever. So I think that it's good to be competitive in a certain way and to look at people who are out there doing something that inspires you. I think one of the differences for me was that, and I'm going to repeat this again, for other people who are becoming entrepreneurs to develop something for themselves, is again, do it for you, focus on you, focus on the sincerity of your behavior and your actions and your pursuit. It's sincere. It's not formulaic. It's not formulaic. It doesn't have the intention to produce a product, but rather the intention is to produce your own development as a person. This is just what you love to do. And it so happens that other people love it too. Then you're winning. And no one can dispute the authenticity and the sincerity of what you're doing, because your intention is noble and proper versus your intention. And again, if your intention is to make money from something, then you may make money, but what you're left with is something that does not have sustainability and complexity, because someone else will come along and make another thing that improves upon that. But if you are developing something that is timeless, what is timeless? Like, what is a timeless idea? As an example, as long as there are humans, there will probably always be watches. Because time in itself is something we all use as a tool. So, you in some way can't be wrong being in the watch. If your passion is watches, in some way you will, probably always have a profession. In some way, humans will always, use watches. If you develop something for, a period of time, then, as a product, like as an example, PayPal was developed as an answer to a problem. Mm-hmm. The problem was there was no third-party merchant that you could use online to buy and sell products. PayPal said, we'll do that, because no bank did it. They did it. And so they created a way for you to buy something online. Very smart, obviously. I believe it was Elon Musk that actually invented PayPal. I think he was one of the founders. So it's a very clever idea. But as soon as there's no need for that anymore, that idea completely goes away. So it is based on some something that humans will not use from, I mean, again, it's not a utility that we use regardless of conditions. For me, Budokan is a utility regardless of conditions. It's something that the development of self never stops, and it's never a fad. It's just an ongoing thing that humans are always in pursuit of becoming better. And that's been from the ancient times to modern times. It's just a consistent thing. So for some reason, I love that idea. And I love things that are timeless in that way. To the second...
I want to say something to the first point.
Oh, please go.
Before you move on. That's something that I heard Rafael say a lot. I mean, Rafael, world champion. But he has this intrinsic drive, right, to train and to become better, right? Constantly there is this hunger and thirst to become better. And I feel similar in the sense of using Budokan, using an opponent, something I can experience myself in relationship to, right? So they become tools in the process of becoming better, because I can measure me against what I experience about me in that exchange. So I really love that idea. And this is how I, for myself, even frame competition or comparison. Again, it's not coming from inferior feeling about self, but rather, again, the inspiration of growth and having to experience failure. And even to your point where you're like, oh, people oftentimes they feel better, but they really feel better about themselves in that setting because they're not failing as much as they might be failing if you put them right away into a fight or experience martial art, which is highly complex. So kind of like spoon feeding them the easier makes them feel better about themselves. And I think there has to be almost like a shift in our minds about failure and experiencing failure as part of the process of becoming, of growing, because it's necessary, right? If we already can do something, then there is nowhere to go. So this is what I really love about the philosophy around adversity and personal growth. I had one more thought, but it slipped my mind. Now. We can move on to
but to your point, like PayPal doesn't have that. It can't grow that way. It's not that kind of thing. And you want something that in life that can continue to evolve, and change. And these kinds of things, they don't in some way. But there are other things that humans produce that do it, like the car. The car has changed a lot and continues to change. It started off as a wagon, this thing you pull. And now it's this thing that runs on batteries and, whatever. But point is that it is a thing that humans will always use, travel. How to, because again, you go back and you go, what do humans do? We migrate. So tools to migrate will always exist. Tools to eat will always exist. Tools to hunt will always exist. So just certain things that just, are timeless. But I think to the second point, which was what you had said to the Budokan.
Becoming Budokan. It's nice debate.
How to become Budokan? What was you had a specific question. Yeah, it was a specific question.
It was so long and I get lost too.
But
I think it was all about like the beginners. Like
yes, how do you teach a beginner?
Yes,
accessible to beginners. Yes.
But that's the thing that I don't. I teach a room the same way. If I have black belts in the room or white belts, I teach exactly the same material, exactly the same way, because I think this is a mistake from the perspective of the educator, is to think, how do I teach beginners and how do I teach black belts. I don't see the difference. I teach everyone the idea. And my job as an educator is to teach the idea in a manner that is consumable by both the advanced and beginner practitioner. It is not to modify my teaching to the black belt or to the white belt. It's to teach it in one way that can be consumed by both. That's the highest level of an educator. I think that's why I've always been successful as an educator, because I can take a room full of mixed level people and everyone comes away feeling like they've won, like they're winning, they're succeeding, because of the way that I deliver information. And I don't have a formula to that is conscious. That's how I teach. My teacher, I thought, was a very good teacher. My first martial arts teacher. His name was Paul Harmon. And he is a very special teacher. I really love the way he taught information. And I modeled myself after that. And I've never taken the time to dissect, and deconstruct what he's doing, what I'm doing. But it's something, I think if I were to just take a quick stab at it, it's something about taking a complex idea and talking to you as if you are 6 years old. Can you teach quantum physics to a 6-year-old? Well, you should be able to. Because if you say, oh, it's just too complicated, you'd never understand, that can't be true. That cannot be true. What's true is you don't know how to explain it in a manner that simplifies it and reduces it to the most basic foundational, sort of parts and pieces. It's like, why can't I just take 2 apples and go, this is an apple and that's an apple? And when the apple gets near the orange, this happens. Why can't I? Why, and I think Einstein even said that. He has a quote specific to being able to take something complicated and make it simple. And that's the true art of either teaching or knowledge or understanding. So I think that you need to really understand the subject matter that you're teaching. And when you truly understand it, you can make any complex idea simple. But when people don't understand truly what they're doing in the full big picture, then they rely on academic language. They speak in this manner that's sort of above everyone's head. They make themselves sound like they're very educated in the field. But the problem is half the room isn't understanding it. And they're not understanding it because this person themselves doesn't understand the fullness of it. So they're talking about what they do understand, and it's sort of in the concept, but they're failing to talk about the integral nature of it, how it's tied into everything. Mm-hmm. Because again, you listen to good scientists speak, they can always make things make sense to you that are highly complicated.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot with movement is people have become so book smart in movement, but they're actually not physically embodied truly, which to me there's even a difference in knowledge and wisdom, right? We acquire a lot of knowledge, yes, through books or listening to our teachers. However, there's a process which I think is the embodiment and the wisdom through my own practice, right? We can never stop having our own practice and our own discoveries, because I'm basically just relying on someone else's experience and their information versus I'm actually really understanding the whole process around it. And I feel like only then you can really teach something to someone from that experience, because then it is even reliable and sincere, if we want to use this language, because this is then real, right? Versus I'm trying to just pull words that have no real meaning to it. And then it becomes more of principles, right? This is how we teach a lot. Principles, constructs versus technical detail.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any other question?
I have so many questions, but you said that you have so many questions too, so I leave that
I
to
do,
you.
but maybe one question for you, and then we will stop this part and open the second part of this podcast.
I think we can move on.
So the time is now. Thank you for watching, guys, and see you in second part.